At 25 minutes after 2 this afternoon, President Reagan emerged from the Washington Hilton. It was then that 6 shots rang out, shots fired at close range from a .22 caliber pistol. At least 4 of the bullets found a target. One of them, the President of the United States.
This is a CBS News special report. The shooting of the President. Here is CBS News correspondent Dan Rather.
Good evening. Ronald Reagan, 40th President of the United States, today became the 8th Chief Executive Officer of this country to be the target of an assassin. Mr. Reagan suffered a wound in his left chest from a single .22 caliber bullet. Where inches count, that bullet missed his heart by inches. The 70-year-old president underwent surgery at George Washington University Hospital to remove the bullet and repair damage to his left lung, which was pierced. A doctor at the hospital described Mr. Reagan as physiologically very young, said the president sailed through surgery, and pronounced chances for complete recovery as excellent. 3 other persons also were shot outside the Washington Hilton today. James Brady, the presidential news secretary, who is officially listed in critical condition tonight, and a Secret Service agent. Also, a Washington policeman. Both of them reported now to be in serious condition. Jim McManus is at George Washington University Hospital now. Jim, what is the latest report there?
After 2 hours of surgery, the president is reported in good and stable condition. Doctors say he awakened in the recovery room in good spirits. They say he is an excellent physical specimen, that he was never in any real danger during the operation procedures, that the president, as the surgeons tracked a single mangled bullet that had entered his left side, struck a rib, and penetrated his left lung. Dr. Dennis O'Leary of George Washington University Hospital here said earlier the president was in some pain, but that he should be able to make decisions tomorrow, that he should be able to run the government from his hospital bed. Mrs. Reagan, who was returning from a luncheon earlier today in a Secret Service automobile, rushed to the hospital when she heard of the shooting, but did not know the president had been hit until she arrived here. She was with the president in the emergency room, stood outside the operating room during the surgery. She's reported doing fine and is back at the White House at this hour. Press Secretary Jim Brady, however, who was struck in the head by a single bullet, is reported now out of surgery in critical condition, and doctors cannot predict the course of his recovery. They do say that his vital signs, his reflexes indicate that the brainstem is functioning, and so Brady's doctors are somewhat more optimistic than they were just 2 hours ago. The next official medical briefing is at 8:30 tomorrow morning. But for now, we can say that the wounded President Reagan, who just about 9 hours ago walked into that emergency room across the street, is recovering nicely, that he is reported in good and stable condition. Jim McManus, CBS News at George Washington University Hospital in Washington.
Good news indeed, Jim McManus, and we'll be coming back to you a little later on in the broadcast. It was mid-afternoon. President Reagan had emerged from the Washington Hilton Hotel after delivering a speech. He was waving to well-wishers, about to enter his bullet-resistant limousine. Lem Tucker was there when the shots rang out.
With the usual aides and Secret Service agents preceding him, Ronald Reagan was leaving the Hilton Hotel. He just addressed a labor meeting, got a very good reception, and that may have added a bit of luster to his usual public smile. Near him, the 3 men who would in seconds be wounded. At Mr. Reagan's side, Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, 31 years old, from Chicago, married, 2 children. A few feet away, just a yard or 2 in front of where I was standing, District of Columbia police officer Thomas Delahanty, 45 years old, a 17-year veteran of the force. And a few feet away, almost hidden from view, Press Secretary James Brady. Those were their places when this scene began.
Mr. President! Get him out! Get him out! Get him out! Get him out!
No one on the scene seemed to know that the president had been shot. Later, White House officials said even he did not realize it at first. The suspect, John Hinckley, had apparently been standing in the press area just to the right and behind where I was standing with other news people. There were many non-news people in the immediate area. Hinckley was instantly subdued, sped away as soon as a police car was brought up. Left there, the victims of this senseless afternoon drama. Press Secretary Brady, 40 years old, shot through the head. He came late to the Reagan inner circle, but gained the confidence of the president. His high good humor may have served him well in that regard, as it did with his adversaries in the press corps. Tonight, Brady is in critical condition after a 6-hour operation. Officer Delahanty, who fell almost on top of Brady, was wounded in the neck and shoulder. He is listed in serious condition. And Agent McCarthy, wounded in the chest and liver, was operated on. His condition tonight is described as stable. Lem Tucker, CBS News, Washington.
In custody tonight, charged with firing the shots at the president and those around him, is a young man named John Hinckley, Jr. He was driven tonight from an FBI field office to the District of Columbia courthouse in a heavily guarded motorcade for the formal arraignment on the charges. Fred Graham reports now on who John Hinckley, Jr. is.
There is mounting evidence tonight that John Hinckley had stalked America's leaders before. Hinckley was arrested at the Nashville, Tennessee airport last October 9th when then-President Jimmy Carter was there for a speech. Airport police picked Hinckley up on the way out of Nashville when 3 handguns and 50 rounds of ammunition were discovered in his suitcase. Hinckley is said to have been in Nashville since October 7th and to have remarked that Ronald Reagan had canceled a scheduled appearance in Nashville for the 7th. Hinckley's ticket was to New York, where both Mr. Carter and Mr. Reagan were scheduled to appear at the Al Smith dinner on October 13th. He paid a fine in Nashville, and since he was never convicted of a crime, apparently his name was not entered in the FBI's computers or the Secret Service's list of persons considered dangerous to the president. Hinckley is next recorded as being in Dallas, where pawn shop records show that he bought 2 .22 caliber revolvers on October 13th. The FBI says he was arrested in Memphis within the past 6 months for what was described as a property crime. He was again fined and released. Hinckley's choice of a hotel in Washington suggested that he came here with President Reagan in mind. A J. Hinckley was registered here, one of the closest hotels to the White House, a little more than a block away. If convicted for attempting to assassinate the president, Hinckley could get up to life imprisonment, and prosecutors say there are numerous other charges that could be added when an indictment is eventually issued. The Secret Service says there has been no evidence that anyone else was involved. Fred Graham, CBS News, Washington.
His high school yearbook picture, a pleasant face, nothing there that said hostility or violence. John Warnick Hinckley, Jr., in his senior year, 1973, at Highland Park, Texas High School, member of the Student Government Club, Spanish and Rodeo Clubs. He would be generally thought of as an advantaged person, a resident of Highland Park, where many of the wealthy of the Dallas area live in fine homes. A junior high school acquaintance recalled he was a real nice guy, but moody sometimes. A senior high school classmate remembered John Hinckley, too.
Just that he was a very quiet student. He wasn't, one of the noisemakers, I guess you'd call him. And from what I remember, his grades were always very good.
In 1973, John Hinckley enrolled at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Business Administration. He did not graduate. He was last enrolled here in the summer of 1980, Arts and Sciences. Rocky's Pawn Shop, 2018 Elm, the same street in Dallas on which President John Kennedy was assassinated. In this pawn shop, owner Rocky Goldstein says his records show on October 13th, 1980, John Hinckley bought 2 guns like this one.
The ATF and the FBI has been down there checking my records. And I've been getting some nut calls calling up. They're going to blow the place up. They're going to bomb the place. Maybe they're going to do me bodily harm. I don't know.
It was in 1980 that Hinckley moved to Denver. David Dick, CBS News, Dallas.
John Hinckley Jr. stayed off and on, say neighbors, at his parents' home in an affluent section of Evergreen, a town near Denver. His father, an oil and gas company executive, arrived home shortly after he heard the news today to be met by Secret Service and FBI agents who questioned the senior Hinckley and his wife at a neighbor's home. Later, family attorney Jim Robinson read a statement saying that the younger Hinckley had recently received psychiatric care, but the evaluation, said Robinson, did not indicate the seriousness of his problems. Other recent activities of the jobless college dropout are sketchy. It is known that on March 11th, he sold a guitar and typewriter at a Denver pawn shop for $50. He never reclaimed the items, but he left a strong impression on the shop clerk.
He was kind of shaky about it, and he was really a strange-looking fellow, I would say. Definitely.
How much total did he get for it?
$50.
Did he stick around long? Did he just sell it and get rid of it, or?
Yeah, he sold it, got rid of it. You know, it was like he was desperate.
And a few days ago, Hinckley checked out of a motel in the Denver suburb of Lakewood, a motel where it's believed he had stayed for 2 weeks. Hinckley's motel stay and his pawn shop visit are under investigation by the FBI. His parents, described as distraught, said in a statement they will stand by their son. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Denver.
As we have throughout the afternoon and evening, we emphasize again that there is a presumption of innocence on the part of young Mr. Hinckley. He has been charged with the crime, but until and unless he is convicted of a crime, that presumption of innocence continues to prevail. Also, it may or may not be worth pointing out, in answer to the question, did the police or the Secret Service fire their weapons at any time during the afternoon? And another question, do we know that all 6 shots came from the same weapon? The Secret Service tonight told CBS News, at this point, the answer is that we did not fire any weapon. The Secret Service emphasized, however, that it will be conducting its own study of the entire incident, including all agents' response. This could take a few days, a week, or more. At this point, there is no indication of any wrong or bad news by the Secret Service. Indeed, every indication that the Secret Service agents on the scene performed magnificently during the day. Now, that's the report from Secret Service. From the District of Columbia Police, they say they have no knowledge of any District of Columbia police officer firing at any time during the afternoon. They have no answer yet on whether all 6 shots, and there is a presumption at the moment that there were 6 shots and 6 shots only, they have no answer as to whether all 6 shots originated from the same weapon. The investigation is continuing. In Plains, Georgia, aides of former President Carter confirmed that they are now making inquiries through the Secret Service as to whether John Hinckley may have been stalking Mr. Carter last fall. Mr. Carter expressed surprise at reports of Hinckley's arrest in Nashville. Well, there's no question but that it's been a long, hard day at the White House for all who work there. Correspondent Leslie Stahl now reports on their day and night under
At first there was confusion. At 2:30, a White House advance man on the scene, and then minutes later a spokesman here said the president was not shot, that he'd been whisked off safely. A half hour later at 3 o'clock, officials said that the president had bumped his head as he was pushed into his limousine. It wasn't until 3:18, nearly 1 hour after the incident, that the White House finally confirmed that the president was hit by a single bullet in the chest on the left side. Asked why it had taken so long to confirm the injury, one aide said the president didn't know he'd been shot at first. A man who was there when Mr. Reagan arrived at the hospital said the president walked in on his own.
They brought the press secretary in first, they rolled him by. And the president walked in holding his... One guy was holding him on the side, and he was holding his arm.
And what did you see? I mean, was he bleeding badly?
Well, I couldn't see that much blood because he still had on his jacket, and you could see a little spot of blood up on this.
But he was walking?
Yeah, he was walking.
Mrs. Reagan was rushed to the hospital. Doctors told her the president's condition was good. Shortly after 4 p.m., a visibly shaken Secretary of State Alexander Haig came into the White House press briefing room and told reporters that as of now, I am in control in the White House.
We have informed our friends abroad of the situation, the president's condition as we know it, stable, now undergoing surgery, and there are absolutely no alert measures that are necessary at this time or contemplated.
Throughout the afternoon, aides went to great lengths to reassure the public that Mr. Reagan was alert with his sense of humor intact.
As he was going down the hall on the gurney, I guess they call him, to surgery, he winked at Baker. He had earlier told Senator Laxalt, who was there, don't worry about me, I'll make it. He had told Mrs. Reagan, honey, I forgot to duck. I forgot to duck. And as they were wheeling him into surgery, he saw Meese and Baker and Deaver there, and he said, who's minding the store? And then when he got into the operating room, he looked at the doctors and he said, please tell me you're Republicans.
The president came out of surgery at 5:30, but it wasn't until 8:15 that Vice President Bush, who had flown back to Washington from Texas this afternoon, assured the nation that the president was okay.
I am deeply heartened by Dr. O'Leary's report on the president's condition, that he has emerged from this experience with flying colors and with the most optimistic prospects for a complete recovery.
Late word tonight, Mrs. Reagan is back in the White House. She's described as fine and calm. There was one final dispatch, a press notice put out by the White House. It reads, and I quote, at 8:50 this evening, the president joked with his doctors in the recovery room, and despite the tubes in his mouth, he handed them a handwritten note which said, all in all, I'd rather be in Philadelphia. Leslie Stahl, CBS News, the White House.
Well, it hasn't been a day in which one has been able to smile very much, but certainly that note scribbled by the president would bring a smile to anyone. The Meese, Deaver, and Baker referred to by White House aide Lynn Nofziger inside that report by Leslie Stahl, of course, refers to Ed Meese, Michael Deaver, and Jim Baker, who are President Reagan's three chief White House assistants. They were at the hospital as he was rolled into the operating room. You'll recall that there was a row last week between Secretary of State Haig and the White House over who should head President Reagan's crisis management team. And in the first hours after the president was shot today, the Secretary of State was again at the center of some confusion. Bruce Morton reports.
The flap started because Vice President Bush was in Texas and Secretary of State Alexander Haig turned up at the White House, temporarily in charge, but seeming to imply there was more to it than that.
Constitutionally, gentlemen, you have the president, the vice president, and the Secretary of State in that order. And should the president decide he wants to transfer the helm to the vice president, he will do so.
Who makes that decision, Mr.
As
Secretary,
of now,
if
I
he
am
can?
in control here in the White House.
That was wrong. At least it was wrong if Haig really meant a constitutional succession. That runs president, vice president, then Speaker of the House. Deputy White House Press Secretary Larry Speakes suggested what was really involved was administrative control. But Speakes' list was also different from Haig's.
There is, for your information, an automatic assumption of command authority that requires no steps be taken. It goes first on the Vice President and second on the Secretary of Defense.
What Speakes apparently meant was military control. The Secretary of State is, for whatever it's worth, the senior member of the cabinet.
I don't know what arrangement he had with Vice President Bush with respect to crisis management, which has been much in the news in the last 72 hours. I would think that he could very well regard himself as a senior member of the cabinet. I think that history is on his side. On the other hand, when Secretary of State Robert Lansing, during Wilson's incapacitation in the World War I era, called a cabinet meeting without informing the president, Wilson promptly fired him.
Vice President Bush was back in the White House by evening, and the argument began to seem more and more abstract.
I can reassure this nation and a watching world that the American government is functioning fully and effectively.
White House staffer David Gergen may have come closest to explaining what really happened.
People gathered here spontaneously. They came because of the situation we were in. And the Vice President was in contact, and the Chief of Staff, and Mr. Meese and others were in complete contact. And we frankly didn't spend a great deal of time sorting through the statutory books and that sort of thing.
So there it rests. In the real world, doctors say the president will be well enough tomorrow, probably, to make decisions. Vice President Bush seems certain to play an increased formal role while the president recovers. And Mr. Reagan's inner circle of advisors will obviously try to take some of the smaller issues off his hands in the meantime. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Washington.
There is a report tonight that John Hinckley, the suspect in today's shooting, may have been expelled from the Nazi-style National Socialist Party of America more than a year ago. United Press International quotes a party spokesman as saying Hinckley was expelled because he, quote, wanted to shoot people and blow things up, end of quotation. That spokesman, according to UPI, also called Hinckley, again, quote, a nut, unquote. West European leaders, often at odds among themselves, are united tonight in their sentiments of dismay and best wishes for a speedy recovery. From London, Tom Fenton reports it is not only the leaders expressing those sentiments.
Early morning editions of London newspapers ran banner headlines. Most of them gave the news without comment, but a London taxi driver expressed the thought that was in many people's minds here after hearing the news.
Guns are very plentiful in America. Anybody can get a gun if they want one. That's the difference between here and London.
Britain's Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher said she was shocked and sent a message to the president saying that she prayed his injuries were not serious. France's President Giscard d'Estaing sent his heartfelt wishes for the president's complete recovery. West Germany's Chancellor Helmut Schmidt expressed his deepest disgust and said he hoped for the president's earliest recovery. The expressions of concern that came from every capital in Western Europe were much more than routine messages of sympathy. The President of the United States is also the leader of the Western Alliance. In a time of international uncertainty, with the possibility of Russian intervention in Poland, the attempt on the president's life has added another element of uncertainty. The leaders of Western Europe, who welcomed President Reagan's election and look forward to a period of more effective American leadership, have strong reasons to wish for the president's speedy recovery. Tom Fenton, CBS News, London.
Congressman Morris Udall said today, it's as though we were watching an instant replay of an American nightmare. And Senator Edward Kennedy recalled, year after year in recent times, we have seen violence in this country. My brother John and my brother Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, George Wallace, Al Lowenstein, Vernon Jordan, the attacks on President Ford, and now the attack on President Reagan. End of quotation from Senator Kennedy. Phil Jones reports now on other reaction in the Capitol.
On the Senate floor prior to today's attempted assassination, well-meaning senators opposed to the president's budget cuts were denouncing the Reagan administration for its alleged broken promises. But when Majority Leader Baker came onto the floor to announce that the president had been shot, no one was in the mood to do any more criticizing, and business was halted. Democrat Claiborne Pell described the atmosphere as being one of shock and horror. Senator Henry Jackson commented, again, our hopes are dashed that violence would not visit an American president. House Speaker Thomas O'Neill, who is second in the line of presidential succession, stayed secluded in his office today. He did receive a phone call from Secretary of State Haig telling the Speaker that key cabinet members had gathered at the White House. And security for all congressional leaders was beefed up shortly after the shooting. Although many of the Reagan political views are in some trouble on Capitol Hill, the president is personally popular. And so in political reality, these unfortunate events of today will probably help him in getting his program through. But in one area, the president's longtime opposition to handgun control, this will probably present problems. For it is sure to be ammunition for those in Congress who want such controls. As Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan of New York put it today, how much shooting is going to have to happen before we get rid of those guns? Phil Jones, CBS News, Washington.
It seems terrifying to a layman. A 70-year-old man is shot in the chest with a bullet that enters his lung. But doctors said President Reagan was at no time in any serious danger and faces an excellent prognosis for recovery. Richard Wagner explains why.
The encouraging news that the president was out of surgery came from George Washington University Hospital spokesman, Dr. Dennis O'Leary.
The president is in the recovery room. He is in stable condition, and he is awake. He was in no time in any serious danger. He was alert and awake with stable vital signs. up until the time he underwent anesthesia. He was in the operating room for approximately 2 hours. Part of that time was spent ascertaining that he did not have any blood in his abdominal cavity. Indeed, he did not.
Dr. O'Leary described where the bullet struck the president as Mr. Reagan was about to enter his limousine.
Traversed down approximately 3 inches, striking the top of the 7th rib laterally, and then going about 3 inches into the tissue of the lung itself.
It deflected downward further from the 7th rib?
No, it's like coming down, hitting the rib, and then deflecting in to take a new path.
Dr. O'Leary used the phrase rock stable to categorize the president's vital signs during the entire operation, and he said Mr. Reagan should be able to continue to make the judgments required by his office.
I think that I would urge him to limit his physical activity within reason. There is no reason to believe that he has any impairment of his ability to make decisions or what have you. Making decisions is stressful business, but I think he's going to be fully up to it.
Welcome news for an anxious nation. Richard Wagner, CBS News, New York.
Let's go back now to George Washington University Hospital and Jim McManus for an update on the president's condition and the conditions of the others, including White House Press Secretary James Brady. Jim?
It's clear from the medical reports here that President Reagan is not only a strong man, he is a lucky man. Doctors say that during surgery, the president's vital signs were rock solid, that he is physically younger than his years. And a lucky man because the bullet that entered his left chest missed his heart, missed every major blood vessel before burying itself in the lung tissue. They say the president is recovering nicely. And a slightly optimistic report now on Press Secretary Jim Brady. Doctors say his reflexes indicate that the brain stem is functioning. His wife reportedly entered his room just a little while ago, squeezed her husband's hand, and Jim Brady squeezed back. The next official medical briefing at 8:30 tomorrow morning. The word here now is the president is in good and stable condition. Dan?
Thank you, Jim McManus. Of course, CBS News will be staffed at the hospital throughout the early morning, and we'll have full reports on Morning with Charles Kuralt tomorrow morning. Hearing the news at a club today, President Reagan's brother, Neil, said, "I broke down and began to cry. I expected something like this to come. It's the way society is today." The president's younger daughter, actress Patti Davis, was reportedly shocked and praying for her father. His youngest son, Ronald Prescott Reagan, left a ballet tour in Lincoln, Nebraska, to fly with his wife for Washington. And there was this reaction from the president's other children.
He's a great man, and he's been a great father. And I just hope the people understand that we do care, even though we're independent. And we hope things like this stop. They stop happening in our country. It's unfortunate they do. But more than anything, I think you'll find out that the Reagan family, or the first family, we love Ronald Reagan. We also love our country. We want to be there. We wish him back to health.
I am not prepared to accept this, whether it was my father or anybody else. I have seen throughout the day the reaction of other members of the family. Mine is fury and rage and anger, and that in this country, this kind of garbage still goes on, and it is not going to happen to this president. My God, it is not going to happen to this president, really. And I think that the American people have got to become angry about the crime in this country, about the ability of people to do this to other human beings, and we have got to stop it, and we've got to stop it right now.
What can the American people do?
The American people can get angry, and they can start to propose policies and laws that have effect, that have teeth, that can be enforced, both through the courts and by law enforcement, and they'll do that when they get angry enough.
Are you speaking of gun control?
I've often said that perhaps it's not guns we should license, but ammunition, but something has to be done.
The president's daughter. Amid reports by the president's doctors that he is in no danger as we pass out of this day and into a new one. First there was Lincoln, and then Garfield and McKinley and Kennedy, all of them killed by assassins' bullets. and 4 presidents have been targets of assassins: Jackson, Truman, Ford, shot at twice, and today Reagan. Theodore Roosevelt was shot at when he was campaigning for president. He was shot, as a matter of fact, while campaigning for president. Franklin Roosevelt was shot at when he was president-elect. These facts, culled from our nation's history, are unpleasant, but unfortunately, they are worth pondering as this day closes. Worth pondering again. Dan Rather, CBS News, New York. Good night.
This has been a CBS News special report. The shooting of the president. This is CBS.